All right. Good morning to everyone. Happy March melting morning. I think the sun is shining across Manitoba and everyone has enjoyed getting outdoors the last couple of days. So we appreciate you taking the time this morning from 9 to 10 o'clock to join us for our finale of our All Ag Hot Stove. These are series, as you guys are aware, for those who have joined in the past, where they all came to be because of another way of trying to get information and outside of the box thinking to you and your farm, ultimately, hopefully allowing you to do a better job on your farm and be more successful at the end of the day. So we've been overwhelmed with positive feedback from these sessions. A large part due to the quality speakers that have been able to join us and share their insight into agriculture. So that's exactly what we have here today, is another two very experienced, very reputable industry members from ag, coming from the media world and from the equipment and autonomy world. And so we're excited to see what they have to share and hopefully bring new ideas to you and your farm. And so like any virtual meeting, I encourage questions, comments, and feedback. These speakers are well prepared and prefer to have questions coming from the audience, because then they're answering the audience comments. If you don't feel comfortable speaking up in the meeting, feel free to send a direct message to myself or into the group chat, and we'll make sure that question gets to the speaker and answered on time. We're going to keep them rapid fire. We're going to have Shaun Haney speaking from 9 to 9:30, and Matt Olson from John Deere speaking from 9:30 to 10. Please make sure that you ask any questions within Shaun's session, as he is not able to join us after 10 o'clock for kind of an informal meeting or question period. So your chance to ask him questions live are up till 9:30, and that is it. So without further ado, I do want to introduce Mr. Shaun Haney, founder and owner of Real Ag Radio and many other media channels out there. I'm sure he needs no further introduction, as everyone has heard him or taken in pieces of content from him over the past 10 to 15 years. I'm thinking it's going back that far. We're excited to hear what he has to say, and I will turn it over to him and let him share some insight as to what he sees are important topics for farmers to be aware of in 2022.
Great stuff. Thanks a lot, Laird. Really appreciate it. Laird, if somebody asks a question during the presentation, will you interrupt me and in case I don't see it?
Absolutely. I will do that. No problem.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen here. Can you see it?
We're live.
Wicked. Okay, cool. Thanks a lot for having me here today. Really do appreciate it. Yes, Shaun Haney of Real Agriculture and Real Ag Radio. Encourage everybody to, if you do have Sirius through the growing season, or you have a subscription, download the app. You can listen to our show live, or of course, we also do podcast it as well. So you don't have to have a Sirius subscription. Real Agriculture also appears on RFD TV in the US every weekday at 10 o'clock Central, and as well every Friday I'm on AgriTalk. So we really have not just focused on Canadian issues, but also American ones as well. So in the short period of time here, going to try to go through three things that kind of come to mind that are really, really influencing where we are here right now. And there's more than three, the reality is, and you could go on for 3 hours on probably just these three and how it is really, really impacting our industry. The three that I chose, of course, are Russia's invasion of the Ukraine, which needs no introduction and continues to be a very, very fluid situation that is having dramatic impacts, of course, on agriculture in the Ukraine, but as well working its way back here to Canada. We'll talk about some of those things here this morning. Inflation in the economy. Inflation has moved very quickly from, hey, it's just transitory and don't worry about it, to holy crap, we're talking about a recession potentially. And then the federal government's environmental policy that is a little bit more a longer tail than probably the first two, but something I really want you to be at least aware of, and some of the consequences. There we go. Okay, Russia and the Ukraine. And this is I don't know how you even describe this. Sad, crazy, unbelievable. There's a lot of different ways that we could describe what is going on in the Ukraine. From an agricultural standpoint, though, it is creating a ton of disruption. This is a graphic I stole from, I believe it was the BBC, showcasing kind of where the areas are under Russian control, where there is, where kind of the troops are moving in on from a Russian advance standpoint. And, this is changing each and every day. Of course, a lot of attention is on Kyiv in the north, and places like Odessa, where the major port is in the south. Of course, Poland is to the left of this, where a lot of the people have fled to. And like I said, I think kind of sad describes what this situation has been. But there is agricultural consequences to this. There's agricultural issues related to this. And I kind of separate it into two things. One, things we know, and things we don't know. And probably the list of things we don't know are greater. But from a what we know standpoint, we know the fertilizer S&D has really been altered. Had a chance to talk to Josh Linville from StoneX last Friday at Commodity Classic, was also there. And this is, one of our largest imports from Russia is actually fertilizer. And this has become a very, very sober reality for Eastern Canadian farmers. We posted a story yesterday that on Real Agriculture, you can check out. Approximately 660 to 680,000 tons of nitrogen fertilizer are imported from Russia into Eastern Canada in a typical year. That's actually, to put that in context, that's about 85 to 90% of the total nitrogen fertilizer used in Eastern Canada comes from Russia. So what has complicated all this for the Eastern Canadian farmer it's sort of a bit of a, to be honest with you, a bit of a holy shit moment, is the fact that there are sanctions applied to this fertilizer now. And governments have been very quick to apply sanctions, and very, very warranted sanctions on Russia. But there is a whole bunch of details that are still, after 3 weeks or whatever it's been, still yet to be really, really figured out. There's examples of fertilizer that was paid for last fall by retails that is on a boat now headed to port. The ship may have a Russian flag. The ship may not. The fertilizer is from Russia, and no real idea yet on whether that ship will even be able to be unloaded. Some of those ships are sort of hovering at port, and some of those ships are on their way. Fertilizer Canada says that they are working aggressively to try to find other sources of fertilizer for that region. But at those kinds of volumes, you can only imagine that it is quite difficult to replace some of that, for sure. Now, some of that fertilizer has already landed and is on ground and won't be subject to the tariffs. But think about, in this example, how fertilizer prices have escalated so much, and now potentially a deal that was done much earlier, like back in the fall, would now face a 35% tariff on top of it. So, and also on top of this, what makes it kind of complicated is that it's kind of tough to ask for those sanctions not to be applied, because that is really, really going against the public opinion of, I think, where Canadians are at this point. This is the same kind of issue that's also happening in the US, specific more to potash. Belarus and Russia are the two, or they're in the top four of potash suppliers. The other one is China. Number one is Canada. And you will also notice that there's a CP rail strike that's about to start, which is complicating shipments of potash into the Midwest as well. So it just feels like we continue to have these supply chain issues really, really hampering our ability to do business. The winter wheat, of course, in the Ukraine is planted. It's about 90 to 95% winter wheat, but of course, side dressing is happening right now President Zelensky encouraged Ukrainian farmers to continue to farm. Easier said than done. A lot of Russian farmers, from people I've talked to, have taken up the fight instead of doing their side dressing, which seems like a decision that is much heavier in nature than some of the ones that we will be making here this week. Global community has acted very, very swiftly to apply the sanctions. This has created anybody trying to do any business, if you actually wanted to, it would almost be impossible. There's a lot of talk about Russia defaulting on debt and things like that. And I think the other thing that we know too is Ukraine as an independent sovereign country is really, really in jeopardy. What we don't know is, will Ukraine have a corn crop? Will they have a sunflower crop? Ukraine produces about 30% of the global sunflowers. Those have to be planted in the spring. Major questions on that, along with crops like corn. China is a major purchaser of Ukrainian corn. And last week I did an interview with Arlen Suderman that we've posted on the website from StoneX, and Arlen is just unbelievable in this area of geopolitical issues, and he really doesn't think a crop's going to get planted. If he had to bet, I'm paraphrasing some of the stuff that he said, but it's really, really doubtful that a majority of that crop will get planted. So not only are we dealing with the disruption of an invasion of a major agricultural producer, but the market's trying to reconcile with what kind of a crop is actually going to come, if at all, out of Ukraine, which is could have much more dramatic impacts than, say, a Western Canadian drought, if you want to look at it that way.
Well, maybe jump in, Shaun. Actually, there's a question that just came into me.
Oh, go for it.
And it was more about in terms of no matter what the outcome is shipping product out of Ukraine even going to be possible in the next 12 to 18 months?
Yeah, I asked this really uncomfortable question last week to a couple of people. Is if you thought about this conflict only from the lens of the ports being open, what triggers those ports reopening? Is it, if this, I had one person speculate this could be a 10-year thing, which seems just unbelievable at this point. But hey, the U.S. was in Afghanistan for a long time too. If Russia takes Odessa, does that port reopen, or does that port remain closed? Right. Those are things we really, really don't know. I don't think that I'm not an expert in Russian, Ukrainian geopolitical issues, but I don't think the end of the conflict is required for those ports to reopen at this point. Now, if Odessa, you have to think that if Odessa remains under Ukrainian control and the Russians are still acting the way that they are, that port remains closed. So I don't think anybody really knows at this point what it takes for those ports to reopen, but they may not be matched to the timeline of the conflict. Does that answer the question?
I think so. I think I'm afraid there's not an answer on it. So
it's hard. Yeah, it's really, yeah. And if I gave you a hard definitive answer, I'd be BSing you. Inflation in the economy. This is man alive. You just turn on the mainstream news at night and it's all about the cost of this. It's all about the cost of that. There's been some, I would say in some cases, undue blame put on farmers, especially when it has to do with the price of wheat and what it means for the price of bread, and having to explain the farmer's take on that price increase in a loaf of bread is so minuscule, it's actually laughable. But that's where the cause would be put on. But this is a reality for people. If you look and try to go buy red meat at Costco, it is crazy what beef costs in the store. And then what gets even maybe crazier is if you talk to a rancher and see how they feel about how they have not participated in some of that price increase. Everyone's wondering, I'm not sure why I have the same graphic there, how aggressive does the Bank of Canada, the Federal Reserve get? We saw the Federal Reserve hike rates. We saw the Bank of Canada hike rates here in the past 2-3 weeks. And that is likely very, very much to continue to try to fight off this inflationary pressure. You know, for example, right now, the average US household is facing $300 extra per month in costs due to inflation. I think that's a big number. That is large. There's a lot of families that $300 makes a huge difference in whether you have a little bit of jingle left over at the end of the month or you are in a deficit position. So this is very, very much what the White House and the Fed do between now and the midterms could have a big impact on what happens, and do the Democrats have any sort of chance in the midterms. And then people already started talking about that R word, you know, recession. Is a recession, is it coming? Is it a reality? There's a lot of people thinking back to what happened coming out of the 70s into the 1980s, and sort of there's you know, a lot of people doing the "I told you so" kind of moments and messaging. It's very, very concerning where we are here. There's, you know, through the COVID pandemic, there was so much money that was put in from a supply standpoint that this seemed to be a foregone conclusion that we're here at this point. It's been very politically popular just to continue to dole out cash to people through the pandemic. And now that is one of the reasons why we're in this spot that we are here today. And I want to talk about this battle over foreign oil in a second. This is a historical chart looking at Canadian overnight bank rates. The key here is look near the bottom, March 3rd of 2020, we're at 1.25, which is still reasonably historically low going back to, you know, the earliest part of this chart, which was 2010. And if you were to stretch this out over 100 years, of course, it would still be relatively low. Right now, we are at 0.5, or sorry, 0.5. And a lot of people talking about us trying to get closer to, by the end of the end of 2022 into the early part of 2023, we want to be back at that pre-COVID level of 1.25 from the 0.5 we are at today. Now, but with that comes real economic shocks to the average Canadian household. There's a lot of Canadians that live very, very close to the line when it comes to their household income and expenses. So there's some pain to be experienced here, even though if we got back to the 1.25, we're still quite low when it comes to interest rates. And somebody, of course, will bring up, hey, I remember the 1980s. You're right. We are very much lower than we were at that point. Let's hope that we do not have to get back to those 1980 sort of levels. We got a lot of people in a lot of trouble if that was ever we were even to get remotely close to that. What we have seen through the issue with Russia invading Ukraine, and what we have seen with some of the cost escalation that has come with that, but not totally due to it. You look at what's happening with the price of fuel and the price of gas at the pump. That is going to be a real shock this summer. You know, this sort of battle over who's going to be correct on where the price of oil is going to go here in the next little while. This is the fight. Do we need to expand drilling? Do we need to have things like the Keystone Pipeline built? Hey, if we did this, we wouldn't have to worry about that Russian oil, as an example. Or, you know, we also have in the Canadian government, and I would say the Democrats in the White House also really pushing for, hey, we wouldn't have to rely on this foreign oil if we just all drove electric cars. And this is the battle that is going on from an agriculture perspective, especially at Commodity Classic last week. You know, a lot of talk about, hey, if we just went E15 year round, we wouldn't have to worry about that Russian oil. And as the U.S. tries to move away for the time being from those 400 to 600,000 barrels a day of oil from Russia, you know, starting to do deals again with countries like Venezuela, you have to ask yourself, is that actually better than the former? This has put a lot of global pressure on trade. If you add these two things together, even going back to the very, very beginning of the pandemic, A lot of people talking about, is this the end of globalization? I really don't believe that. People like their cheap stuff, and all of that cheap stuff cannot be produced here in North America. We are seeing increased level of protectionism. We are seeing governments having just conversations about, do we need to limit exports of certain agricultural commodities to try to keep domestic food prices down, which can be very challenging because the outcome, like we've seen historically, is that all that does is raise the future price or the global price, because we are fiddling and meddling in the global S&Ds in a global economy. And a lot of pressure on reconsideration of domestic production of stuff. This is agriculture is not isolated from this. You think what's happened with crop production manufacturers. We've had 2 years, and probably will be also talking about in 23 about the supply of crop protection products. This has been a real challenge because some of this is coming from around the world. We may start to see more of those supply chains, at least. And when they talk about resiliency in the supply chain, I think to me, it's an overused word, but it really means diversification of options. And, I talked earlier this week on Real Ag Radio, we're moving from just in time to a supply chain that needs to be more just in case, which has plan A, B, C, D, maybe even elemental P. This has been a real change in mindset here, going back to March of 2020. Skip over that. Environmental policy. So this is more being driven by the federal government in Canada as well as the United States. They're both tackling it maybe a little bit different. We'll stick to Canada in this case. When you think about solving problems in Canada right now, most things are looked at through a climate change lens. ECCC has Minister of Environment and Climate Change Canada, ECCC, has a lot of power, a lot of influence, and most things are looked at through that lens. Some of that is positive, and some of that has some consequences for our industry. One of the potential positives is the clean fuel standard, if it is put in, if it is implemented in a manner that is friendly to our industry. It is an opportunity for a huge bump in demand. The reason that we're seeing so much increase in domestic crush capacity, or intended increase in domestic crush capacity of canola, is completely driven by the clean fuel standard and renewable diesel. It's the reason why we're seeing so much planned capacity expansion of soybean crushing in the US as well. This is not because we're planning to, we have all this demand for meal and we have new uses for the oil. It is all about renewable diesel. And that is a real game changer for both canola and soybeans, and canola even more so based on its characteristics. One of the other things to keep your eye on is carbon tariffs. This is sometimes called carbon border adjustments. The idea here is to even the playing field. This is something we're going to hear a lot more about in the go forward. Europe is a big pusher of this, specifically France. Canada is very, very much on board. The US is also looking at it. The idea here is that you would punish imports from countries that do not have the same level of environmental regulation as your domestic programs. So to provide an example, if we were importing certain products from China, if those were produced in a less than environmentally friendly manner, a tariff would be applied to those goods to not disadvantage domestic production of those products. I have interviewed numerous people on this topic, and there is a wide range. Even inside the conservative side of the aisle, there's a wide range of opinion on the idea of doing carbon tariffs. I think for most people, they make sense when dealing with countries like China and India. Where it gets very convoluted is where we talk about the potential of them being Canada using them against the United States. Because the United States does not and potentially will not have a price on carbon. And so that's where I get super concerned myself. We've also tried to we're also trying to implement sustainability programs like Responsible Grains, an example. Soy Canada is developing its own program, things like that. So there's a lot happening on this climate file. I find it dizzy and hard to keep up. And so I can only imagine how you all feel about it. I mentioned the power of the ECCC. big time issues when it comes to fertilizer emission reduction. Government updated us on that a couple of weeks ago. So that needs to be on your radar. Beef industry very much paying attention to the 30% target on methane emission reduction. These are big on the board topics that the government is really they are committed to implementing. It's the industry's job to make sure they are implemented in a way that considers some of the intangibles of agriculture and making sure that it's not a detriment to us and profitability over the long term. And if you look at the entire environmental policy when it applies to Canada right now, it is all about European policy. We are not influenced as much as one would think by what the US is doing or going to do. We are very influenced by what European policy is on some of these things, which I think should be a major concern for all of you that are here today for this. Just quickly wrap up. I remember when President Biden first took the White House, because Carlo Dade from the Canada West Foundation. And Carlo had said to me, Shaun, and he's worked in the US, he's been in Canada. Carlo said, be very wary of the US disguising protectionism with the fight against climate change. And so this is something that when we talk about, why do we have to sustainability? Why do we have to do this? I hate that word. This is bunk. It's just marketing. And there's an argument for all that being true. But, last week I sat in on the ASA policy meeting of the American Soybean Association. I also sat in on the National Corn Growers Association policy meeting. And I can tell you that they are very focused on using their sustainability programs as a way to increase market share in the global trade arena. And so I think it's something that Canada needs to be paying very, very close attention to, because we are competing very, very much in those same markets. The high quality, high protein wheat that we're producing in Western Canada is the same wheat that we're competing against from the PNW. In the Pacific Northwest. So we go toe to toe in many markets, and we need to be paying attention to the sales pitch of those competitors, the US being one of them. You guys are going to talk, I think, about autonomy and robotics and electrification here in the next speaker, so I'll sort of save you from that. But full speed ahead when it comes to equipment manufacturers trying to very much capture the opportunity of what potentially could be when it comes to autonomy, and electrification very, very much fits into that. Whether the broader market of farmers like it or not, there is demand for it, and it is very much coming and not to be stopped. So I went through that as quickly as possible. Oh my goodness. I hope there are some questions for people based on my very quick rambling.
Very, very well done. There has been a couple questions come in, Shaun.
Yeah, cool.
One of them is going back to your mentions on supply and demand, and mentioning on specifically herbicide products for Western Canada. And the question stated is, in your opinion, based on who you've talked to, is the supply concerns fear-driven, company-driven, or is it real?
So I think it is real. I think there is a genuine level of realness out there. I don't think it is fabricated. I think we need to be, fertilizer is a good example. You go back to the fall, people were like, I'm not buying any, this is all hype. Remember in 2008 when the price dropped, and which did happen. The reality is not all situations are the same. One of the challenges, and we saw this with toilet paper at the beginning of the pandemic, is that if there's any concern about shortage, it leads to actual shortages, because there is the distribution system is not as efficient, right? And so you have a situation where you could have retails hoarding product. You could have situations where farmers are hoarding products, because, we've been telling farmers all winter, you got to have plan A, B, C, D. Well, having a plan of A, B, C, D is having options, and those options involve maybe different products. And so, there could be situations out there where farmers have on farm 4 different options in case they need to use any of them. Which, once again, leads to shortages. If you think about glufosinate and glyphosate as the 2 main examples that everybody is kind of talking about, both companies have said we are not short, but we are tight. And both referencing last year's volumes, having enough supply, but both providing disclaimers that we're delivering that product to retail. What happens from retail to the farmer, that's we're on control of that. So that's an interesting disclaimer that both companies have made. On the glyphosate front, Bayer has said that they have enough glyphosate for the Canadian market for pre-seed, in and in crop. They are at this point are not committing to pre-harvest or post-harvest. So pre-harvest may be challenged this year from a glyphosate perspective.
Sure. Yeah. No, that's interesting. It's good to hear your opinion, because we're hearing many different opinions coming from many different channels as producers and farmers. And so trying to mesh those together and form an answer is really the challenge everyone's going through. So, and I'll maybe segue into asking you one more question, which is a question coming from me to help us segue into Matt's presentation. And that is moving towards that autonomy, automation, new technology, adoption rate curves. From your chair, when you speak to many different farmers across Canada and as well as industry, where do you see that going, and how quickly do you see it moving?
Yeah, I think it moves fast. Like I think it's one of those things where all of this felt like it was like 10 years away, not too long ago. And now it feels like, oh my goodness, it's here. And I think there is some, once in a while, like who's asking for this? Who wants it? It's the same kind of thing that probably happened when we moved from, the horse to the powered tractor, from the steel wheel to the rubber tire. Like, oh, who would want a rubber tire? They just go flat. Like steel wheels are like so much more durable, right? These are the same kind of things that probably change is hard. And so I think it's really upon equipment manufacturers to show, they have to prove the value. It can't just be cool technology. It has to be, there has to be a value proposition to the farmer. I think a lot of, and I think that's coming true. I don't want you to misinterpret what I'm saying there. And the other opportunity here is that I think a lot of people have jumped that this is all going to just absolutely get more expensive. The reality is when you remove some of the components like a cab from some of these units, things get cheaper. And so I think there's a bit of an assumption too from people that this is going to create massive price escalation for the cost of equipment. In some cases that will be true, and in some cases it won't be true when you get to the things like some of the swarming opportunities that are out there from autonomous units. I think there's transition periods. One of the transition periods, I saw one of the videos that John Deere put out this week, maybe you're going to see it a little bit later, is where the cab detaches and the cab becomes like this office studio on the side of the field. I think there's lots of different ways. If I think back to Agritechnica 2015, 17, and 19, there was different thoughts in each of those years on where this was going. And so what we see today on the vision and what it looks like, it probably won't be the reality in 4 years, but that's okay. That is absolute, like, that's not a negative. That's what innovation looks like. You test, you trial, you get feedback, and you forge, you very, very, very much forge ahead. So I think it's an opportunity, but it won't be for everybody, and that's okay too. Like it's about choice. There's manufacturers out there that are pushing more traditional, simple, like, there's going to be a fit for everybody. It's not all going to be, you don't have to be on the cut, the bleeding edge, no matter who you are. So anyway, there you go. I appreciate the question.
Yeah, no, thanks for your insight, Shaun. Very much appreciated. And thank you for joining us today. look forward to hearing more from you in the future. And so, you know, with that segue, I do want to make an introduction to Matt Olson. I was able to connect with Matt Olson through Drew Anderson, which is the regional Manitoba John Deere representative here. And so Drew got us connected with Matt, who comes with probably, I think it was talking to him yesterday, 20 plus years working with John Deere in various roles. Grew up on a farm in Iowa, beef and grain mix, and so has those homegrown roots and has had the opportunity with John Deere to work in sales and marketing, finance side of things. And so it's really tying all aspects of his kind of career together as he moves forward and leads his marketing team in new technologies coming to the marketplace. So happy to have Matt, and we'll continue on with this presentation. Due to potential sensitive information, I do have to turn the recording off for now. So this is your chance to ask further questions in person and not have and get the real answer, but not have it recorded and out there. So you can take it away, Matt.